So in particular, when you think about the broader funding for landscape registered apprenticeship, there's both federal apprenticeship funds, and those funds come from the Department of Labor vis-a-vis ETA, the Employment and Training Administration, through the Office of Apprenticeship. But there's also broader federal funding, such as through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is a broader policy and also funding mechanisms that flows to state and local workforce development boards that can support things such as supportive services. But there's also a broader state funding, such as in some instances, state tax credits for registered apprenticeships or other state funding or public-private partnerships. So when you look at the broader funding landscape, think of it as an ecosystem and how you could braid these funds to really achieve your goals. We have an intentional investment plan around registered apprenticeships. We have state grants. They come out both in formula funding as well as competitive funding. Then there's other competitive grant opportunities across the Employment and Training Administration, which is the broader umbrella where the Office of Apprenticeship sits, that also has funds as well that they facilitate. Our investment plans really centers around these national infrastructure that we want to build out. For example, TA, we have tech centers of excellence. We funded organizations such as Jobs for the Future to provide technical assistance to really support and expand DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. As a direct result of our partnership and working closely with the Department of Education and working with the White House, we funded the first industry intermediary specific to education, RTI International. They're a funded intermediary that works with partners and can work with you all to provide free technical assistance to support developing registered apprenticeships. Most recently, we awarded what we call our SAFE grants, State Apprenticeship Expansion Formula grants, as well as competitive dollars. Those were recently awarded in 35 states. And again, this is another example of the partnerships. Just over last year, there were only 2 states that actually identified less than a handful of states that identified education as a priority. And a few years before that, no states. However, as a result of our collaboration with the Department of Education and broader partners as well in this engaging in this work, 35 states are now targeting education as part of this, which means that they're identifying it as a priority and encourage partners to really engage with state partners and leaders to really leverage those collaboration. So in the registered apprenticeship system, there's what's called 29, there's 2 key regulations, 2929, which is specifically around program standards in the broader apprenticeship, but then there's 2930, which is around the equal employment opportunity. How do we think strategically about supporting underrepresented populations and underserved communities? But there's also funding, and elements include data sharing and integrity, plan to expend funds, how you think strategically about staffing, DIA efforts, and other broader kind of elements that are included. The way to think about the WIOA funding is really in a ecosystem that is really aligned and working well together. They could leverage WIOA funding for a population such as for supportive services. So like, let's say you're developing a program, you might leverage the apprenticeship funding to support classroom instruction. You might leverage it for capacity building. You might leverage it for a variety of certain ways. But there's WIOA funding that you could work with your state and local workforce boards or community-based organizations that are partners in the broader workforce ecosystem that could support things such as transportation, childcare, and other work clothing, and really think about the funding as it being aligned. That is really the best way to really think strategically about it. When you think about our funding strategy, the 2 buckets I like to think about it is a strategic and an operational. And this is a way I would also encourage you as you're building out your programs, as you think about funding and investments, what is the strategic lens and what is the operational lens? And both are valuable, and funding can support both. On the strategic side, I like to think about it around sustainability. So for example, they're really around building ecosystem capacity and demands, developing research, elevating best practices, ensuring there's equity and DEIA incorporated in building out, improving data sharing and integrity, pre-apprenticeships that leads directly to registered apprenticeships. Those are strategic ways to really think about building a broader and leveraging investments to really build a sustainability for registered apprenticeships. But on the flip side, and that is integrated, there's also the operational elements around implementation. So you say, all right, I understand we got to build the ecosystem. We need to support around capacity building and research. But now, what are some ways that concretely funds can also be used in operationally and implementation? And there's some examples such as supportive services, classroom instruction that apprentices may need, providing funding to support mentorship, funding that supports credentials, data, and employer incentives are the common examples of operational leveraging funds for operational and implementation.